So I just told you the story of when I took my kids on a trip across the country to visit historical sites that I had written out into my life story. And remember that life story is just a way that you retell the stories that you believe are true that cause you to have the results that you're getting, right? So the premise of life story, of course, is that if you want different results, you have to tell a different story about it. And so this is where I started to pay attention, because now I've had kind of two miraculous things happen, and now I want to see what else is possible and what other miracles I can create. So throughout that process, I just want to tell you the story of two more trips that came to me in that same year. So in the spring, I was able to take my kids on that trip, and later on, actually, earlier in that year, I had this thing that I wanted to go to Africa, and it seemed like a crazy idea to me at the time, and I really couldn't tell why I'd want to do that. But I just had this feeling like I wanted to go do humanitarian work in Africa, and at the time it was totally impossible, because I was working one full-time job and a couple of part-time jobs, and I was trying to take care of my family, and my husband was also working. Like nobody worked harder than we did, or more hours than we did, and we still had no time, and we had no money to do any of that. And so these are actually things that were really quite impossible for us, but I'd already had these two miracles, so I thought, what the heck, we might as well just write it down and see what happens, right? So the first one was an opportunity to, we had been telling our kids for a long time we were going to go to Disneyland, like a long time. Every year. We'll go in the fall. No, now we're going to move it to the spring. Okay, I guess it's not going to work out now, so we'll go next fall. Okay, so probably we're going to try again next spring. We did that for years and years and years, and finally I thought, this is ridiculous. So I am going to write it in my life story that we go to Disneyland. So I did that. And sure enough, we got a couple of ideas on how to earn the money to do that. And we put together a group trip, so we could get discount tickets. And then the other one was this trip to Africa that I wanted to do. So I storied that, only I started with one line that I wrote down about going to Africa to do humanitarian work. And it took me, I was thinking, maybe, I don't know how long it will take for that to happen, because it was such a big deal, that maybe in a couple of years I can save money, or I can get an idea of how to do some fundraising, or some idea will come to me about how to make that happen. And so I just wrote down that one line that I go to Africa to do humanitarian work. Well, as soon as I wrote that down, things started to shift, and I started to meet people who did that, and different things came into my life in that way. And every time I'd meet someone, or I'd get more clarity about that, and I'd develop the image in my mind about what it would look like for me to go to Africa to do humanitarian work, and then I would write that down also. I would write that down along with my one sentence about going to Africa to do humanitarian work. So pretty soon I had a paragraph built out, and then I'd be doing things like getting ready in the morning, and I would just get an impression about what it would look like for me to do that. And so then I would go back to my life story and I'd write that down. And so I just kept building out in my life story, making up. Basically, I'm making up in my imagination what that would look like. I'm telling a story that's made up. It hasn't happened yet, right? Which is what imagination is for. So I write that down, and it took about 10 months, and I ended up going to Kenya on a trip. But the funny thing was, and this is what I wanted to share, how profound this is for me as I review and in my own mind and remember where my life was before Life Story versus where it is now. Because in that one year, I was able to take my kids on that trip across the country, which by itself was impossible. I think that was in March. And then in October, my husband and I took our 10 kids and some friends to Disneyland. And then in November, as soon as we got home from that trip, I turned around and I went to Africa on my first humanitarian trip. And so those were big, huge things in my life, things that, I might do one every 5 years or something like that, if there was a miracle, and they all happened to come to pass in the same year. So just wanted to share that with you, and encourage you to get busy with your life story, rewriting the things that you need to tell a different story about.